You're watching Conversations 6.0 Part 1 with Jeff Nielson, Silver, Comex Paper Games, and QE2.
Hi guys, SGT here, and I'm extremely excited to have Jeff Nielson, the brilliant writer and economist from bullionbullscanada.com on the line. Jeff, welcome.
It's a pleasure to be back.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you back. There's so much happening in the precious metals world right now. RICO lawsuits have been filed against JP Morgan and HSBC for silver market manipulation, and the world is waking up to the rampant criminal fraud. And I wanted to get your take on these developments.
You know, it's hard to know where to start. Certainly the lawsuits are significant, although I'm not sure these initial actions are going to get too far because, of course, the bankers still have plenty of defense watching out for them. But, it's definitely significant in terms of the language being used and the scope of the suits compared to, the preliminary things we were hearing a few months ago.
I've heard some are predicting that the banks will probably just step up and claim national security and have the suits thrown out.
It wouldn't be a surprise. There's a provision in the Patriot Act that even allows for U.S. corporations to essentially stop reporting their business operations in times of quote-unquote emergency. So, I could easily see something being coupled up with that in terms of some sort of, as you say, threat to national security and, using that as a pretext for circling the wagons.
Yeah. Well, and what's ironic, Jeff, is that I think at the end of the day, any thinking person would come to the conclusion that, QE2 and what the Fed is doing with this money printing, and then added to that the fraudulent actions happening within the Comex and the LBMA, that is a threat to our national security. That's the ironic part.
It's truly the old, through the looking glass scenario, because Bernanke's having to basically talk out of both sides of his mouth on a daily basis now. One day he's saying how, we need QE2 in order to create more inflation because we don't have enough inflation, is if that's somehow possible. And then, of course, the next day he's denying all that and saying, no, this is for employment and it has nothing to do with weakening the dollar or creating inflation. And, he can't even be consistent day to day, let alone week to week any longer.
And, it really is madness. I mean, I was listening to an interview with Jim Willey recently in which he called QE2, quote, an abomination. And, I think he's right, Jeff. I think at the end of the day, this is going to hurt so many decent people who do not see this tidal wave coming. And it's just completely irresponsible and immoral, is it not?
Well, and it's also essentially not just a sham because, I've been writing myself that there never was any cessation of QE1. All that happened was the Federal Reserve stopped admitting that it was continuing to print money like this. And basically the only thing that's happening now is that it's gone back to admitting all of this money printing simply to be seen to be, quote-unquote, doing something because obviously the U.S. economy was starting to head south again, and they simply couldn't sit back and do nothing, given that they had already predicted that their previous grandiose plans were going to get the U.S. economy back on track.
Well, I think what tends to agitate me a little bit, too, is seeing these talking heads on CNBC essentially reparrot back the propaganda, which is to say, well, to use the euphemism QE2, for instance, as opposed to saying money printing, and to talk about the battle against deflation, which is to promote the idea that inflation is good, when in fact inflation is going to destroy the middle class and the working poor. I mean that literally. People are going to suffer when they can't feed their families.
The problem is there's simply no understanding of the consequences of severe inflation in our cultures. And it's due to, decades of programming that inflation is some sort of benign, natural occurrence in our economies when nothing could be further from the truth. Inflation in any form is an abomination because it literally sucks all the wealth out of the economy and it bestows it into the pockets of a few people, notably those operating the banks.
You're absolutely right, Jeff. And I think maybe people believe that, inflation's okay because, salaries will keep in line. But that's not what's going to happen. Salaries are dropping. Real incomes are dropping.
Well, in fact, this is a big theme in my own writing, that in real dollars, wages in the Western world for the average worker have been falling for 40 years. And, basically what's been done is we've had massive structural unemployment incorporated into our economies deliberately by our governments because they're using this massive unemployment to hold down wage demands And of course, that's one half of the inflation spiral. You get prices going up and then wages going up to compensate and then prices going up further. So the evil plan of our governments was to deliberately have this high structural unemployment in our societies so that for the average person, wages are permanently depressed. And this mutes inflation to a considerable extent so that those at the very top get the best of both worlds. Their incomes continue to soar higher and higher, even above the rate of inflation. And the reason that their incomes are soaring above the rate of inflation is because our depressed wages are holding inflation down below their own income threshold.
Well, I wanted to ask you this too. Jeff, on Tuesday, November 9th, the total volume of silver traded on the Comex was 1 billion ounces, an amount equal to 166% of total annual worldwide silver production. Jeff, what do you make of that kind of action happening on the Comex in one day?
Well, this was simply a part of an organized takedown of the commodities sector in general, and it was a tag team effort on the part of the U.S. and China. And it started off with rumblings out of China that were indicating that its economy was going to slow down. First of all, it was going to raise its bank reserves. Then it leaked a rumor that it was going to raise interest rates. And then it followed through with yet another increase in bank reserves. And, meanwhile, you have the U.S. Tuesday morning, literally halfway through a trading session, changing the rules in the game and changing margin requirements during a trading session in order to ambush the precious metals traders and start this big slide. And, so it was a totally coordinated effort, premeditated in every respect, premeditated for several days in advance. And actually the first sort of link in the chain was World Bank President Robert Zoellick getting in front of a microphone and saying that he thought we should have a gold standard again. And the whole idea there was to try to get the sector slightly manic, and giddy with this talk and get everyone extended to the maximum extent possible. And then, like I said, literally halfway through the trading session on Tuesday, they changed the margin rules and, basically instantly wiped out all the margin players that were, in over their heads and set the whole cascade going.
This concludes Part 1. Click here for Part 2.